It's the year 1325, and the Bolognese and Modenese armies are about to square off at what has been called one of the bloodiest medieval battles in Italy, but also one of the dumbest, because this was the War of the Bucket. To understand why the war started, we have to look at the political climate it started in, and for that we'll have to go back all the way to 800 CE with the crowning of the first Holy Roman Emperor, Charlemagne, by the Bishop of Rome. And even though Charlemagne didn't realize it back then, his crowning by the Bishop of Rome set into motion the centuries-long struggle between the European kingdoms and the Church, especially as it pertains to the Holy Roman Empire. How did this happen? Well, first thing you have to understand is that the Bishop of Rome is the Pope, and Charlemagne was the one who appointed the Bishop of Rome, who was then the one who crowned Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor, which created a weird circular division of who actually had power over whom. On top of that, Charlemagne's appointment of the Pope set the precedent of European kings appointing their own bishops and other church officials in their own lands, because if a king can appoint a Bishop of Rome, why can't he then appoint any other bishop? However, Charlemagne also set the precedent of the Pope crowning the Holy Roman Emperor, so if you were the ruler who controlled the appointment of the Bishop of Rome, you were also the one who controlled the crowning of the Holy Roman Emperor. In theory, anyways. This resulted in the fact that after Charlemagne, the Germanic and northern Italian lands that became the continuation of the Holy Roman Empire turned into a political battleground over the control of the papal succession, with oftentimes the ones who controlled it being, unsurprisingly, also the King of the Germans and the Holy Roman Emperors. But all this changed around 1050 when the Papacy actively started to reform the appointment of the Bishop of Rome and diminish the nobility's control over them. And when Henry IV became a 6-year-old king of the Germans, he clearly didn't have enough experience at the time to handle the delicate relationship between the king and the Pope. So the Church Council in Rome seized on the opportunity and restructured the rules of the papal succession, creating the College of Cardinals as the sole body fit to appoint the Pope. This meant that no longer could a ruler control the appointment of the Pope, at least to such an extent as they did up until now. This created many problems within Europe, although I'm going to be focusing on just the Holy Roman Empire. For one, Henry IV, now no longer a kid, denounced the current Pope Gregory VII as illegitimate since he wasn't appointed by any king. The Pope, on the other hand, denounced Henry IV for being an illegitimate ruler of the Holy Roman Empire since he wasn't officially crowned by the Pope. On top of that, even though the Bishop of Rome wasn't appointed by the nobility anymore, all the other bishops and church officials around Europe still were, which meant that they were more loyal to their feudal lord than the church. The Pope tried to remedy this through several dubious power-grabbing moves of using the tradition of investitures to control the appointment of church officials. This resulted in a lot of political intrigue and instability throughout Europe and even a 50-year-old civil war in Germany, as the factions loyal to the nobility and the Pope fought over who had the rights of appointing church officials. It ended in 1122 with an agreement called the Concordat of Worms, where the nobility could retain some of its control over the appointment of church officials, but the Pope was finally recognized as having some power in the actual appointment process. And even though this treaty settled certain problems, it resulted in the fact that now you had two opposing factions roughly on equal footing, meaning that throughout most of the Middle Ages, there was lots of continuous political maneuvering, intrigue, and battles between the supporters of the church and the state. And as it pertains to the Italian part of the Holy Roman Empire, these divisions played a vital part in the political landscape of the various Italian city-states. This is because the area was kind of a proxy battleground between the Holy Roman Empire and the Papacy. It properly started off 45 years after the Concordat of Worms in 1167 with the foundation of the Lombard League. This league was a coalition of various Italian city-states that didn't like the fact that the Holy Roman Emperor declared direct imperial control over them. And surprise, surprise, the league was supported by the Papacy. The Holy Roman Emperor Friedrich I led an army to Italy but was defeated by the Lombard League at the Battle of Legnano and had to sue for peace several years later. This peace treaty recognized the Holy Roman Emperor as the ruler of northern Italian city-states, but it also gave Italian cities a lot of autonomy, which proved problematic. This is because after gaining all this autonomy, in fact, all Italian city-states started to have a big rivalry amongst each other, and this political environment proved to be perfect for the next stage of the Church versus the Holy Roman Empire power struggle, with cities either starting to be loyal to the Church party, called the Guelphs, or the Imperial party, called the Ghibellines. However, these divisions developed their own little weird dynamics outside of the overarching Church versus the HRE plot. Cities would sometimes not even care what each party stood for and chose their allegiances according to what what was the most politically and economically beneficial to them. For example, the church party tended to be more prominent in large mercantile cities, as the empire was the main threat to their wealth and trade networks. On the other hand, the imperial party tended to be more prominent in smaller cities and the countryside that oftentimes felt threatened by the bigger mercantile cities. On top of that, even though some cities were starch pro-church party or pro-imperial party, other cities didn't mind switching their allegiances if it suited them. Plus, some cities had bickering imperial and church factions that would oftentimes fight against each other over the control of the city. And even though it was the power struggle between the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope that started these parties, the northern Italian city-states took it up a notch. Your allegiance to one or the other party started to affect many other things outside of just your pro-church or pro-empire leanings. Any big and small issues or disagreements started to be split amongst party lines. And not just that, depending on what party you were associated with, it affected what taverns and shops you were allowed into, what cities you could trade in, how you dressed and what side you put the feather on your hat on, and it even affected how you cut certain fruits. The allegiances of some cities to its party became so strong that you can tell what party a city supported by just looking at its coat of arms today. If it has a white cross on a red field, it supported the imperial party. If it has a red cross on a white field, it supported the church party. These divisions came to a boiling point during the 13th century Interregnum of the Holy Roman Empire. This was a 67 years long succession crisis within the Holy Roman Empire where the princes were unable to agree on a new king. This instability, combined with the various pretender kings and the continuous power struggle between the Holy Roman Empire and the Papacy, was the final straw for northern Italy. And even though there were battles between the imperial and church factions prior to the Interregnum period took it into an overdrive. The imperial versus the church faction struggle took a bit of a respite after the 1289 church party win at the Battle of Campaldino. This battle drastically diminished the power and consequently the threat of the imperial party in Italy, and because Florence was the one leading the church faction in this battle, they became a prominent, if not the main power within the party. But now, since the church party seemingly won, with the imperial party being on its back foot, the Florentine church faction ironically started to be concerned with the increased papal influence within the city, so a split within the church faction happened, with the supporters for more papal control being called Black Guelphs and the supporters for less papal control being called White Guelphs. The Black Church Party, with the support of the Pope, eventually won, and most of the White Church Party members were exiled from the city, which included the famous Dante, who after his exile went on to write the Dante's Inferno, but I digress. Even though this church party division was most prominent in Florence, it showed the underlying problems and disunity within the faction, and the imperial party wasn't any better, with Emperor Henry VII stating that he was disgusted by both sides' actions, pointing out how some members strayed very far from the initial party goals. This was because at this point the church and imperial parties meant much more and many other things to many other people than just the power struggle between the church and the Holy Roman Empire. Plus, if you think about it, it isn't that big of a stretch that after so much fighting through multiple generations, the reasons for one's loyalty to their party became skewed to say the least. So at the start of the 14th century, the prelude to the War of the Bucket was a multiple centuries long power struggle between the Church and the Holy Roman Empire that turned so out of hand and created so many feuds in northern Italy that now even the Pope and the Emperor denounced some of the acts committed by both factions. Hope you enjoyed the video. To be honest, the whole church versus empire factions of medieval Italy is a subject so complex, many of dissertations have been written on it, and therefore I had to skip or simplify a lot of nuances or details that shaped certain overarching decisions. Thus, there's a lot of footnotes in the description that are trying to explain some of it, and if you want to know more, there are always sources in my scripts. Lastly, if you're looking forward to the War of the Bucket video that will be coming out on my channel at some point, consider subscribing and maybe hitting that bell icon, because the truth is, the War of the Bucket actually did not happen as portrayed in all of these YouTube videos.